Welcome to the Rebuild Procurement podcast, where we dive deep into topics to keep procurement people up to date and ahead of their peers. Today, we are talking through, first, Alan, you had your experience with conversational AI with Gemini Live. Talk through that a little bit. China and supply games. There's a New York Times article about some things going on between cutting off some U.S. companies, one in particular, and then we could talk through a little downstream and future possibilities. Retaliation, and then maybe for the last week, and then we'll give it a rest. But we're going to talk a little more DOGE and some spending and areas of opportunity.
We want to rebuild.
Rebuild it.
It'll take me a month to rebuild it.
Rebuild.
That's how you rebuild, comrade.
I'm Tom Finn, bringing 15 years on the client side, procurement, finance, and category management experience in large and small cap orgs.
And I'm Alan Veek, a procurement geek on the sell side of the street, and I've assembled a team of superhuman procurement professionals doing managed services at a company that we call Summit.
All right, Alan. First things first. You have a good Thanksgiving?
Oh yeah, I had a great Thanksgiving. We had all the birds back in the nest except for our oldest, but we get her at Christmas. So yeah, fantastic fun.
Yeah.
How about you?
Good. Yeah, my birds still don't fly, so I got to hang around with them and family. So it was good. But I guess as we, I don't know if your conversations were with Gemini were on your way to Black Friday deals or what they were about, but what was your
Cyber
experience?
Monday deals?
Yeah. So I've played around with it a bunch, but what was your take?
Yeah, well, see, I saw I watched way too much football during the break, and I saw all the commercials, including it's like the extended cut commercial from Google about their new conversational AI that's a part of their Gemini. They call it Gemini Live. So I saw that, and I thought, wouldn't that be nice if it came to my phone? But it's always slow. I'll probably see it in 3 months, 6 months. But then lo and behold, the very next day, it popped up on my phone and it said, would you like to make Gemini Live? So I clicked all the right buttons, chose the great female British accent, and then just got carried away and probably lost half a day to playing with Gemini Live. It's really good. I mean, the conversational aspect, you don't realize how important that is and how much it can make a difference in terms of interactivity, maybe. And it allows your brain to think while you're getting an answer back, and you can think about your next question. And then it has this memory so that it can remember the string of questions that you've asked. So it has some greater amount of intelligence built in based upon history. So I just found it to be incredibly, incredibly useful. And, it's step 1 of 100 on the way to some sort of much better AI. I think this is the way AI is going to be. It's just going to be incrementally better, month after month. And then one morning we're going to wake up when we're both a lot older and say, wow, look, we've got general intelligence. It's here.
Yeah. As we talk to the general intelligence, right? Like, wow, look at you. You've grown up. Yeah. I've played around with it. I mean, the cool thing about it, I think that's call it like the step outside of the information response, and everyone's kind of played around with ChatGPT, how it's way better than like a Siri. But the thing with Siri is, and even like when you're talking to your phone for like text messages, it how it doesn't handle your pauses. It tries to respond to you immediately. I think Gemini is the same. I haven't played with Geminis, but on ChatGPTs, it's you pause, it might start responding, but you're like, hold up, and then you just reinsert yourself and it pauses again. I think that's kind of like what I noticed is a big difference. I was driving with my son. He was asking about, I don't know, planets or something like that. And we're using it as just like conversational. Because kids, they always ask you stuff. You're like, I'm honest with them when I don't know. I'm like, tell me I don't know.
Yes. It's good. And it's this supports, speaking of kids in the car, this supports a long-standing Veek tradition that I can't do anymore because the birds have flown from the nest. But I used to threaten my kids in the car. I'd say, do you have any questions for your father?
Yeah.
Because if you don't have questions for me, I have questions for you. And then they'd always come up with questions. So I could say,
good.
ask Gemini.
Yeah. It's definitely a good way to get up to speed on something too. Like the conversational, something that's cool is when you have a friend you can kind of, bounce stuff off on. That's like intelligent in an area, like a specific area. That's the cool thing I think about this. It's like, all right, you have like your version of the encyclopedia that can talk back to you. So you talk about it, like flips pages through everything, and you get that more clear response after just like 10, 15 minutes talking. You have like, you can become a relative expert in a field for having good questions over the course of an hour. Like you could be way above your peers with just that kind of conversation in a specific area.
I completely agree. And it is like a questions and answers Wikipedia of sorts. Wikipedia makes us all smarter. We can go and find information there, but this actually makes it conversational, and it makes it so that it's just a lot easier to dive for the exact piece that you're looking for. I will say that I think the next iteration that will make this truly phenomenal is some sort of there'll be a number, a percent truth ranking, so that it will understand how much it believes that what it's telling you is true. So we were playing around with some football stats as we watched football, my sons and I, and we asked a question about one particular player, and it came back, and it, hearing it in a British accent, it's authoritative. It's got to be 100% correct. And I would say it was mostly correct, the information they gave us, but one of my kids pointed out, they said, I don't think that's exactly right. So we went and dug in, and we were able to find out in 30 seconds ourselves, okay, that player is actually not still playing with that team. They're an unrestricted free agent. They've been let go, and the AI gave no inkling of that whatsoever. It just told the answer as though it were 100% true. So I would love this notion of having the ability to understand, okay, the information we're giving you, we believe is about 90% correct. So that if you don't get that full 100% stamp, you're like, I better go do some research myself just to make sure.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great addition. The first one was that was missing from a lot of them, and they've gotten it over probably the past 6 months, was citations. I noticed even over the weekend, ChatGPT, which is the one I primarily use, started citing things, but like Perplexity, which if folks are playing around with ones and want a little bit better, like confidence in the response for information, perplexity.ai is better for that one, seemingly better for that one. But they do cite, like Perplexity does a great job of citing. ChatGPT's getting there. No, I totally agree. That's a good call.
Here's what it looks like. Hello, Alan. So let's give it a test. What do you say?
Go do it. Live.
Good morning, Gemini.
Good morning. How can I help you today?
I was wondering if you could tell me who has the best procurement podcast.
That's a great question. The best procurement podcast really depends on what you're looking for. Some of the most popular ones are Art of Procurement, The Procurement Show, and Procurement Reimagined. These all have a lot of episodes, so you could find a few that sound interesting and give them a try. Would you like me to find some podcasts that focus on a specific area of procurement?
Yes, please. And can you tell me a little bit about this new hot podcast that I've heard a little bit about called Rebuild Procurement Podcast?
Rebuild Procurement is a podcast hosted by two guys who are really trying to shake things up in the procurement world. They've got a pretty unique approach where they focus on tearing down some of the old ways of doing things and looking at procurement in a whole new light. They talk about how procurement can be this strategic tool that drives the whole company instead of just this back office function.
Oh, sounds very interesting.
Can you subscribe?
Yeah, it sounds like they really get into the nitty-gritty of how procurement can be this strategic tool instead of just this back office thing, Do you want me to find some specific episodes that might be interesting?
No, I think actually what I'd like, can you tell me a joke about Rebuild Procurement Podcast?
Sure thing. What about this? What do you call a pirate who buys a lot of supplies? A procurement buccaneer, and their podcast would totally be called Rebuild Procurement, right?
I don't think that's too funny.
Yeah, that's horrible.
Hey, a pirate joke is the best kind of joke, but I see your point. I can find a different one if you'd like.
No, thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
Have a good one. Yeah. So they're getting more clever with speech.
Yes. So it's it's interesting. I do like. Maybe we need to change our tagline. She gave us a good tag. We're trying to tear down, and it's very violent.
Is that leaning into that? the Roman Empire type stuff.
Yeah, that's right. But that was it. It's that was completely unscripted, and so it's interesting. You can see that it's somewhat compelling. So if you're not on it, go check it out. Everybody, I think ChatGPT has a version of this. I would bet that Claude does too.
Yeah, Claude's awesome, by the way. Like
Mm-hmm.
I told you I was like, I play around with coding, and you could do an app in the darn thing. You run out of credits super fast, but it's shockingly good. So it sounds like Gemini is trying to catch up. Google has been the laggard here. So
Yep.
sounds like a lot of their engineering dollars are getting pumped into AI.
Yeah, for sure.
So
Yeah,
cool.
I read an article basically making the case that Google is having their lunch stolen at the playground by everyone else, and not just in AI, but also in search. So, the last several years they've seen their search, the percent market share of search decrease for Google.
Oh yeah,
because of because of these AIs. People are going to AIs for questions first, and so I think there's a real sense that maybe for the first time in 20 or 25 years, Google is a bit threatened. So they could go into the desert. If you remember, Tom, it's a very simple story I tell myself about Microsoft. Microsoft founded, I think, in 1973, but really became a thing, call it in the late 80s, early 90s. And then they had a good, probably call it 80s, 90s, up to about 2000, maybe early 2000s. They had a great run. Then they had succession issues, and then they had creativity and innovation issues. So they kind of had
they also had Justice Department issues.
Yeah, Justice Department issues, and that's a good point, because you'll see it comes back to play here. And then, by and large, I would say between 2005 and like 15, it felt to me like they were just dead. Microsoft was dead, and I pushed to put my first business that I started with a friend. We put it on G Suite, on Google Suite, because it just felt like Microsoft was no place. But then all of a sudden, the sleeping giant woke up. I think under the tutelage of Satya, the new CEO, they really drove a lot of innovation back into their products and rethought, maybe tore down and rebuilt the way they thought about things. So it's interesting. Google here is right. They've got a big Justice Department decision against them that they're appealing right now. Google could be at that Microsoft moment in the early 2000s, where they may be heading into the desert for a decade and maybe need to come back out and be reborn. Who knows?
Yeah. Satya, he's an awesome CEO. I've watched plenty of YouTube clips on him. But on Google, the Justice Department is looking to rip out Chrome, I think which, if you really think about what Chrome is to Google, it's their operating system. So they have ads that generates all the money, but all of G Suite and a lot of these different apps and things, they run through Chrome. So like Google Docs, it's all through Chrome, and they have these Chromebooks that use Chrome essentially as their operating system. So yeah, it could be kind of ripping out the Windows that Microsoft had from Google. So
yeah, which if you think about it, this is always the way birth, growth, death cycles happen. And to successfully navigate a birth, growth, death cycle, you actually can't continue to live off of your old self. You have to reinvent yourself. So, to that extent, Microsoft had to reinvent themselves off of the Windows operating system. So maybe Google will have to reinvent itself off of ad sales and, the Google ad space that's made them the monster that they are. So they've got to find their next thing to be reborn around. Who knows what that is?
Yeah. There's just that how the company trajectory goes, and just over time it goes down unless you reinvigorate with something like Microsoft has.
Yeah, unless you jump off of the S curve that brought you here and you jump onto the new S curve. You got to find the new S curve.
One to watch is going from search to AI for Google. That's like, Google is considered like that playbook that they have is like, people just say like the most amazing, business you could have is search the way Google does.
Yep.
But yeah, being disrupted by Sam Altman and others. So we'll see.
Co-opetition or creative destruction, whatever you want to call it. It's all good, especially for us, the consumers.
Consumer, for certain. Now, something not as good for the consumer, Alan. Maybe at the end we'll see how it plays out. But there was a New York Times article on China and some supply chain games, specifically right before the election. Skydio. I don't know. I'm not big into the drone market. I'm not sure if you are, but Skydio is a U.S. Air quotes U.S. drone company. One of the few. There was a great episode. Is Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz. They talked through a supply chain of they're talking about drones and robotics and how just so much is in China. I think we talked about this a few weeks back. Skydio is the U.S. version of that, and they've been trying to gain footing. And they're the U.S. parts company, but I think it was their batteries aren't. Their batteries are still made in China, and China's like just before the election, they're like, "You're cut off," or like a version of that. I don't know if they cut their order, if they cut them off completely, but it just shows how fragile that the supply chains of the world are in reliance anywhere. I mean, it could be via weather, it could be via politics. But with that, so there's a lot of discussions or maybe just announcements around tariffs right now. And what they went into in this article was, okay, what is, Donald Trump has a certain playbook. His playbook is I spend a lot of money, therefore I want better deals for that money that I spend with you. So the very simplistic version of it. And
wait a minute. He sounds like a procurement guy.
I know he knows. Yeah, we've all done that. Maybe he's the CFO we all roll up to. But but with that, he has the ability to say you'll need to pay an additional tax to sell into my economy. That's kind of the card he's playing. And with China, I was looking up some statistics. Like 31% of global manufacturing, 31.63 per perplexity global manufacturing is done in China. So just imagine a lot of that is also sold into the United States. It'll be interesting to see how this whole story plays out. There's critical things. The three I tweeted or X tweeted, whatever, posted on X were rare earths, which go in. There are certain minerals that get mined, generally quite dirty too, I believe, and they mine a lot within China, and they sell, I think, a lot throughout the world. A secondary piece is like chemical processing, lithium. 60% of the lithium goes through China. I think like 90% of the processing. So like all of the battery materials, majority of it goes through China before ending up in Panasonic's court to make into a battery. And then the third one I was thinking was just manufacturing across components and the everything else that makes up that 31%. That's the leverage they have. And if you get cut off, you lose access to certain things. How will people respond? So I thought it was an interesting article. Like I said, saw in the New York Times. What's your thought on some of this, Alan?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I think a big chunk of like the lithium and the kind of call them the dirty commodities that power everything that we want and need to do. A lot of that's just messy work. And so it feels like we've outsourced it to somebody who's happy with kind of doing the dirty jobs, as Mike Rowe would say. And so that, on the commodities, it feels mostly like that. That's processing of those commodities. I know that indeed, because of the large landmass that China owns, they basically also can dig that stuff up. That in and of itself is a dirty job. I know that in South America and in North America, we've got a fair number of these rare earths and others, and we're finding more every day. I read an article last week. I can't recall what, but I think we found a lithium deposit somewhere in the U.S. here that's pretty sizable. But digging it up, and
Nevada, I think, has a lot.
Nevada has a ton. It's where most of the gold mining in the U.S. happens, is in Nevada, in the mountains. So it's we either have to make peace from an environmental standpoint with processing these sorts of things here, which is a dirty job. Right now, they're being processed, and they are just as harmful, maybe even some would argue more harmful to the environment, being processed in a third-party country like China, because maybe their environmental restrictions aren't as stiff as ours. So we might do a better job, certainly a more expensive job. It wouldn't be as cheap to do that work here onshore. But I think the answer for most of those commodities is let's send it to a friendly trade nation, someplace that is happy to do the dirty work, but is also a friendly trade nation, maybe an English speaking country like Australia, someplace like that, or one of the Asian countries that relies on us for protection and support, trade support. That's the first thing. Second thing I'd say about these comments is, if you look at Germany, Germany is almost entirely an export economy. So they make things, and they make high value things. Like most of the machinery that powers the plants that make the things that we buy as consumers comes out of Germany. You think about automobiles, you think about weapons, you think about plant process equipment. It's Germany is an export nation. You wouldn't want to be in Germany's shoes right now, because as the world stops making things or making less things, Germany's in a world of hurt. And I think of China in that same way. If they're the world's manufacturer, I think the reason why the U.S. is applying these tariffs and this leverage and this pressure right now is they almost rely on us more for the manufacturing that we ask them to do than we do buying their stuff. So I feel like we've got the more powerful hand to play here. We're the buyer, and Tom, you and I know, being procurement geeks, that in the battle between buyers and suppliers, it's usually the buyers that win. The buyers have the power. So I think the U.S. is smartly using that leverage, and we're probably only seeing the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, because I mean, if you just play it really simplistically, like you're saying, Alan, are there alternatives? The answer is yes. Like, will I be able to use them tomorrow? Probably not. So, but how can I maximize? Like, if you have the biggest, if you have your largest contract at your company, and there are other opportunities that are like nipping at their heels of that supplier's heels, they'll talk. They'll talk.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Yeah, if you're spending a bunch of money, that's always it's always the biggest leverage, right? That you have a lot of money to spend, in the U.S. government and U.S. Just the U.S. Consumer has a lot of money to spend.
Yeah, I read an interesting article a couple of days ago about how there's a strong interplay between regulations, specifically deregulation, and tariffs. And the person who wrote the article was making the point that regulations are binary. So basically, a regulation will keep someone from building something or allow someone to build something, whereas tariffs are a little bit more analog. They're a fine-tuned knob. So you can crank them up in a percentage basis, tariffs, to either pull more manufacturing onshore or push more manufacturing offshore. And the upshot of the article was the U.S. needs to be playing with both of those knobs. But the biggest one that's going to be most important for us is the regulatory knob, because the reason why we don't make a lot of these things onshore today is because of intense regulation that keeps us from building. It keeps it offshore.
Yeah. So if you U.S. versus China, I mean, you can make the ground super dirty there relative to the United States with those type of regulations. That's kind of what you're saying, Alan. So if you're going to build a new plant, like a lot of the codes, a lot of those things, they're in place that make it, companies unable to build because the dollar per square foot is going to be so high versus if you have it just outsourced to China.
Or you think about building a new nuclear plant. It's going to take 10 years of red tape and time, and time. And most people say, no, that's not worth my focus. I'm going to go build something else. And consequently, we don't get any of that here. So the article's point was we need a huge deregulatory push. So maybe if DOGE wants to look for the biggest lever it can pull, it might actually not be on saving money or decreasing the size of the U.S. government workforce. It might be, how can we push more deregulation? So we'll see.
Yeah. Elon knows that best. I mean, to be in all truthfulness, he's like one of the few companies himself as his companies that's been able to do pretty crazy stuff given the regulatory environment. Like he's stayed within code and been able to build a car company, a rocket company, like a real rocket company, and not just like a drone company, real rockets that have to like shoot off, from only very specific places that were rarely even used. So yeah, he's probably one that knows that quite well.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And I know I've said this before, but it's one of my favorite things in the biography about Musk is he famously says you take 90% out of something that you're trying to make. You remove the safety engineering of what you're trying to make by 90%. He said you're almost guaranteed that you're going to break it, but you want to see how it breaks, and then you always add 10% back in. But the net result is you've taken 80% of the engineering out of something. You've made it simpler. You've made it cheaper. You've made it faster. And I think that sort of a mindset it's 180 degrees from the way the rest of us think. The rest of us think, risk first, and he thinks risk last. I think that's how he's achieved the amazing things that he has.
Yeah, that will not work in government. That won't.
At least not today.
Definitely not today. But yeah, it should be interesting to watch. I mean, there are a lot of levers to pull, but see which ones are pulled. So just maybe with that transition over to DOGE, Alan, I'll hand this one over to you to tee up.
Yeah. So I think on last week's pod we said, hey, let's try and do a couple of things this week. Let's try and figure out what the baseline is for number of federal employees and both the annual budget, the size of the deficit, and the size of the debt. Let's try and figure out what those numbers are as a baseline, and then let's let optimistic Tom and pessimistic Alan lay down some numbers. Let's go on record. This DOGE thing has a sunset. They've kind of they've published their manifesto, and they've set the life cycle of this commission to expire about 18 months from now, July 2026. So pretty quickly, in 18 months, we will have an answer. How effective were they? And I'd love to get you, Tom, and I both nailed on this. Let's get nailed down on this. Let's figure out, who's right in this prediction. What do we think they can actually accomplish?
Yeah. So how do you want to set it, Alan? Because we talked a little bit about it, and I'll come up with something. I'll stand by it. But how do we want to set it? The tough thing, I think we found a good spend number. I think we found debt's probably the easiest one. Everyone has those little counters.
Yes.
But the federal employees, I put in our doc here. I think we're at like 2.95 million federal employees, which oddly I thought it was going to be a little bit more. The majority of those folks,
me too.
Yeah, the majority of those folks are within the defense and military at it's 770,000, and then Department of Veteran Affairs are at 400,000, which I'm surprised by that. And then Homeland Security at 200, Department of Justice just over 100, and then the Treasury's just under 100. And then it goes Agriculture, Health and Human Services, Interior, and then Social Security Administration at 60K. So those are the numbers.
Yep.
I don't.
2.9. So let's take just as a first swag. I saw numbers as small as 2.1, but I saw numbers bigger than 2.9. So I agree. I think let's just put a line in the sand. Let's say 2.9 million. That feels right. It probably underestimates it a bit, is my guess.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go. I'll be first. I'll go on record that we will see less than 1% of the workforce being reduced.
Yeah.
So
I thought you were going to go up. I thought you're going to be bold and say, I think it's going to be more.
No, see, pessimistic Alan. Remember pessimistic Alan.
Yeah, I thought
I just think that this is a much more difficult job than.
No, I thought you were going to say the increase. It was going to go from that 2.9 or whatever 2.2, and it's actually going to be 2.3 or 3.3.
Yes. Well, maybe I should. I actually do believe that this might be the spot where they have a little bit more leverage, because they've talked about moving. First of all, they talked about requiring 5 days in the office, a return to work, in-person work. So that might drive a bunch of people out. They've also talked about moving the headquarters out of DC for some of these agencies, so that people would have to say, hey, I live here. I've lived here my whole life. Do I really want to move to Tulsa, Oklahoma? where the new headquarters is. So I think that they've got more leverage on this one than they do on the spending side, on the dollars side. So but I'm going to still say less than 30,000 employees by the end of DOGE's life.
Yeah. So again, these numbers tough to follow. For some of these, tough to find. The one thing that might change, I don't actually think it'll change in the next 4 years, because it's always the U.S. Postal Service is part of the government, and that's the one thing that, in some cases, they're like, oh, let's privatize this. I actually don't think that'll happen in the next 4 years. But I mean, if you're doing one, I thought you were going to go like +1, +3. I was just going to go the simple, hey, when your CPO or CFO asks you for a number, you say like 3% of. For this one, I was going to go 3%. I think you do.
3%.
If you want me to be more bold, we can throw it to 5. But I do think there's going to
Okay.
be some opportunity to reduce. Truthfully, I don't know where, but I think that they're going to have some effect on. It might where I'm hedging myself here. So I'm giving a number, but I'll give my actual expectation too. So let's lock me in at 3.
Good.
But I think the main focus of next year, and we'll call it the next 18 months, is going to be on suppliers. So I think it's going to be on the amount of spend to certain companies and kind of to the regulation side, Alan, that you talked about.
Okay.
I think it's going to be on the how do we insert more competition to different programs and maybe even the way that things get structured. That might be even a more bold comment than number of employees, but I could see that being the path forward. But lock me in at 3 +3.
I like that. Now, see, this is perfect. We didn't plan this, Tom, but I am less than 1 and you're greater than 3. So there's this in between ground that we can always kind of argue, okay, who was closer if we end up in between. But there is,
when it increases.
yeah, or when it increases.
Well, yeah, you still get that. That's still your side. That's still your side. That's still your side.
Yeah, but I like that. It's interesting though, because again, you have a different take also on this. You don't think that the people lever might be the biggest lever. You actually think that the spending through suppliers might be the bigger lever. So that's
it's like the auto industry, right? Yeah. The auto industry is Ford, GM, that Detroit area. They have so many employees, but then the outwardness of the rest of the supply chain is really where the money gets spent, and it's on employees at those companies. So just think of the Department of Defense has, like I said, 700,000-800,000 people. Like, it kind of aligns with the way we spend money too. So
for sure. All right, speaking of money, let's do it. Same thing. So I came up with in my searches, I came up with the fact that the budget this year is around 6.8 trillion. The budget next year that's been proposed is 6.9 trillion. Next year's budget has not been nailed down yet. It's still, of course, it'll carry into 2025 before they actually come up with a budget, and then it's probably still a moving target. Tom, do you have any other numbers to add to that? Those are kind of like the baselines for annual spending that I thought we could talk about.
Yeah, so 2024, what I found on treasury.gov was 6.75. So they're about the same. Trillion, though. Let's label that a number. Trillion with a T. So yes, we're aligned around that number, Alan.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So
yeah, good. All right. Would you want to do a percent? What do you go first? How about that? Now let's set context here.
Sure.
Tom, you and I, procurement geeks, in any business that we're hired in to come and do procurement, what would we tell the CFO we could save on an annual spend? Like, from my point of view, if it's first year, low hanging fruit, you're like, yeah, I could do 5%. I could probably do north of 5%. I could probably even get double digits. I would willingly put my name, sign up for that. So that's kind of what procurement can do. What do you think our DOGE is actually going to be able to do?
Yeah. So maybe to give some context around how the U.S. government spends money, do you want category or department? Alan, what's more interesting?
Yeah, let's do category.
So for the category, $125 billion is spent on Social Security, just about 100 is national defense, then 85 health, 80 net interest. That's the fourth biggest line item. 77 Medicare, and then 50, and then it goes down from there. This don't really anyway. So that's the numbers off Treasury. I don't know how it necessarily gets to the trillions of dollars there, but I think that might be that's the review they have. But if we just use that as percentages,
I think that the number for interest payment was small, or maybe it was only for one particular agency or area, because I did hear that we are now above 50% of our budget goes to maintaining our debt.
50%.
50. Yes, it's crazy.
That is crazy. I think that some of these are broken out in ways that when I saw this out, I was like, oh, transparency, unbelievable. Now I'm like, wait a sec, this math doesn't add up to whatever $6-7 trillion wherever we're at.
Yeah. Somehow though, Tom, it does.
This doesn't even add up to one. What the heck? So if we just assume, because I've seen the pie charts, where a lot of it's defense and a lot of it is health. Irregardless of interest, I mean, the way to cut and to look pretty is if you have your interest rate lower, which that's an action that technically, or maybe it's even hypothetically or theoretically at this point, should be outside the control of the government itself and should sit by itself. So, I mean, they have a lot to cut. I'm always to my detriment at times. I shoot high on these. So I'll say greater than 5% is what they can cut. I don't know where you're thinking. Perfect. Yeah, but I'll go greater than 5. I'll keep optimistic Tom here. As much as I argue with myself internally, I wouldn't do that. We're
going to be clean once again, because I came up with less than 3%.
Okay,
was my line in the sand, my stake in the ground.
See, but you're not so pessimistic, Alan. This is you're hedging more than me, I think, with these.
Well, listen,
something's going to happen. Still,
I'm the sales guy. I'm the one who's supposed to be like, oh, we'll cut 30%.
Yeah, I know.
That's pessimistic for me.
I'm
that's
internal sales. You'd be surprised.
For me.
Yeah, I thought you were going to go plus. I always thought there was going to be pluses here, Alan.
Well, yeah, I mean, so I guess what I'm saying is a 3% cut off of the 6.9 trillion baseline. So the new higher baseline is what I was predicting. Now, it's not to say they won't budget more for 2026, because we know that the incoming administration loves to spend too. So it'll be quite interesting to see how that desire to spend will interact with the mindset of DOGE.
Certainly. All right. Then the last one we have, I guess those are really the two, right? Spending.
Those are the two.
Yeah.
Those are the two. Yeah. We're not going to make any significant. Yeah. We're not going to touch the, we're going to touch the deficit, but not meaningfully. We're still not going to pull in 6.9 minus 3% of revenue, trillion in revenue. And the debt that will be the positive number. The debt will continue to go up.
Yeah.
Up and to the right.
Yeah, I mean, unless there's some of these tariffs come into play, the government itself, while the consumer gets, air quotes, hurt, the government rakes in some more money. And then, the other side, maybe the last number that we're not touching on, Alan, but is kind of the GDP, called the sales number. You expect that to go up or down next year?
I expect it to go up.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. The only thing is, if you end up cutting certain amounts of money, then it could go down a smidge. Yeah. But I think the sales pitch from the administration really is, if you think of it like a company, it's going to be top line first. We want top line as our number one item. And then the cost management side is our secondary piece. But really, we want to grow the top line and we want to manage the bottom line.
Yep, I think that's right. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be fun, regardless. A great roller coaster. Hang on tight.
For sure. All right, Alan. I think that's the pod.
All right, Tom, that's the pod. He is Tom Finn. He puts the Finn in finance. And for me, your host, Alan Veek, the original OG, we will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us on the Rebuild Procurement podcast. Like and subscribe on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest procurement content.
We want to rebuild.
Rebuild it.
It'll take me a month to rebuild it.
Rebuild.
That's how you rebuild, Common.
Rebuild.
Show me, and you won't hear the word.
Rebuild.